Adventure bikes today are everywhere, but few riders realize how one machine from Italy tried to rewrite the script long before the trend exploded. The Aprilia Pegaso 650 of the 1990s didn't just appear as a quirky off-road traveler with European flair, it arrived as a statement piece from a company better known for scooters and sport machines, stepping into a market dominated by bigger names and bigger budgets. And that tension is what makes it fascinating. The moment Aprilia decided to build the Pegaso 650, it set off a chain of decisions that would either elevate the brand into a new category or bury the model under the weight of expectations it couldn't meet. Riders who stumbled across it back then remember the surprise of finding Italian styling wrapped around a single-cylinder heart designed to survive dirt roads, highway miles, and everything in between. For a company craving recognition beyond step-throughs and race replicas, launching an adventure bike wasn't just risky. It was a gamble with identity, global reach, and engineering priorities. The Pegaso 650 arrived at a time when mixed-terrain touring was still niche and misunderstood in the United States. Most motorcyclists either went full street or heavier dual sport, and Aprilia tried to target the space in between with a design that didn't fully match rider expectations, but hinted at what would come years later. Imagine walking into a dealership and spotting a model that looked exotic, carried a trusted engine configuration, and wore a badge most Americans associated with small displacement commuters. That mismatch created curiosity, doubt, and brief fascination. The real story isn't just that the Pegaso 650 existed, it's why it emerged, how it performed against the unspoken rules of the segment, and what its quiet disappearance tells us about timing, ambition, and attention in the motorcycle world. If you're into machines that almost changed history, hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment about what overlooked bike or era you want covered next. The Aprilia Pegaso 650 stepped into a world that didn't quite know what to make of it, and examining its origins reveals how ambition and timing collided in ways Aprilia couldn't fully control, beginning with how the company positioned a mid-displacement adventure motorcycle in a decade still defining the category. Micro-story. In the early 1990s, Aprilia had already built a name for itself in scooters and smaller sporty machines, but executives recognized a growing European interest in motorcycles capable of light touring and occasional dirt travel. Rather than build something entirely in-house, they sourced a Rotax single-cylinder engine with a reputation for durability, hoping that pairing a proven heart with Italian design would create credibility beyond their existing catalog. Engineers debated how rugged the Pegaso 650 should be, and decisions about suspension travel, frame geometry, and ergonomics reflected a compromise between real off-road ability and everyday practicality. The result sat in a gray zone that some riders found intriguing and others found confusing, making early impressions unpredictable. Context digest. In European markets, riders were accustomed to touring on smaller displacement machines, and a single-cylinder adventure bike didn't sound strange. But in the US, motorcycles in that category either skewed toward lightweight trail use or full touring weight, leaving little room for something in between. Aprilia attempted to split the difference, hoping the Pegaso 650 would attract commuters, travelers, and weekend explorers all at once. That broad approach risked leaving it without a clearly defined identity, especially where brand recognition lagged behind its rivals. Micro-story. Marketing materials emphasized versatility and styling, showcasing photos of the Pegaso 650 on gravel paths and winding rural roads, but dealers struggled to pitch it to customers unfamiliar with Aprilia's aspirations. Test riders appreciated the bike's smooth power delivery for a single and its comfortable upright seating, yet some questioned whether it could handle extended off-pavement routes without upgrades. Word of mouth was mixed. Some called it ahead of its time, while others dismissed it as an imported oddball. Without a strong dealer network in the US, many never saw one in person, let alone took a test ride. Reflection bridge. The contrast between European curiosity and American uncertainty created an invisible barrier that specs alone couldn't overcome. Micro-story. Pricing also complicated things because Aprilia needed to recoup development and import costs without scaring off riders inclined toward more established names. The Pegaso 650 frequently landed in showrooms at a slightly higher price than similarly sized competitors, leaving potential buyers unsure whether its styling and engine heritage justified the extra expense. Some early adopters praised its handling on back roads and its manageable weight, but skeptics pointed to limited aftermarket support and questions about long-term parts availability. In regions where Aprilia dealerships were scarce, the bike felt like a gamble. Context digest. Riders who specialized in long-distance touring often selected heavier machines with larger fuel tanks and comfort accessories, while off-road enthusiasts gravitated toward lighter dual sports with simpler maintenance needs. The Pegaso 650 attempted to offer a middle path, but that positioning required careful messaging and dealer support, neither of which were strong in the American market during that decade. Meanwhile, shifting economic conditions and exchange rates also influenced how the bike was priced and perceived abroad. Reflection bridge. What Aprilia saw as an adaptable platform sometimes came across as a compromise rather than an innovation. Microstory. Accessories and optional luggage kits were available, but many riders found them expensive or difficult to source, which limited the bike's appeal to those serious about adventure touring. Test comparisons in European publications occasionally praised the Pegaso's refinement, but pointed out that support networks and spare parts access remained ongoing concerns. In the US, imported stock was limited, so each unit had to make an outsized impression to justify its presence. Riders seeking something distinctive were intrigued, yet brand familiarity almost always influenced final purchasing decisions more than curiosity did. Context digest. During this era, another manufacturer pushing a single-cylinder adventure platform managed to secure stronger dealership ties and broader press coverage, which helped shape perception of how such a bike should perform. Aprilia lacked that footprint in North America, and even in Europe, its reputation was still tied to smaller displacement machines rather than rugged travel companions. Enthusiasts who did buy the Pegaso often praised its road manners and unique look, but admitted they had to overlook uncertainty about long-term ownership. The slow spread of those real-world impressions created a muted presence in the motorcycle landscape. The accumulation of small doubts and structural hurdles set the stage for a larger challenge that would become more visible in the following phase, where market expectations and internal strategy collided in even more revealing ways. The Aprilia Pegaso 650 entered its middle years with mixed momentum, and as broader trends in motorcycling began to shift, the bike's strengths and weaknesses became more pronounced in real time, shaping perceptions that would linger long after production changes took hold. Microstory. As adventure riding gained traction in Europe, riders started demanding more touring accessories, better wind protection, and extended maintenance intervals, pressuring Aprilia to update the Pegaso 650 without drastically raising its price. Engineers tweaked bodywork, refined engine tuning, and made cosmetic updates that hinted at a more mature design language. Yet even as the bike evolved, critics pointed out that its fuel range and aftermarket customization remained limited compared to rivals with stronger dealer ecosystems. Riders who owned the Pegaso praised it in forums for smooth highway manners, but often admitted they struggled to source parts quickly when something failed, eroding confidence in longer journeys. Context digest. In the US, faint recognition of the model lingered among enthusiasts who followed European bike media, but rarely translated to actual showroom interest. Import numbers stayed low, leaving the motorcycle largely invisible behind better promoted entries from brands with domestic distribution channels. Riders who discovered the Pegaso frequently did so through used listings or chance sightings rather than marketing campaigns or dealer events. Because of that, mainstream conversation about adventure motorcycles in North America rarely included Aprilia's attempt, creating a perception gap between continents. Microstory. At the same time, internal strategy at Aprilia remained in flux, as the company balanced investments between racing development, sport models, and expanding its scooter dominance in urban markets. The Pegaso 650 was never the flagship adventure platform. Instead, it sat between priorities, receiving modest updates rather than comprehensive overhauls. Some riders who test rode it loved the Italian flair, but felt the weight distribution and suspension valving limited serious off-road ambitions unless costly modifications were made. Owners willing to invest in upgrades discovered a capable touring machine, while others returned to more established options with better support. Reflection bridge. Without a stable platform of parts availability and aftermarket attention, early enthusiasm could not always translate to lasting loyalty. Microstory. Around the time other manufacturers doubled down on dual sport and adventure touring, Aprilia faced economic headwinds that made it harder to market the Pegaso effectively. The company's limited advertising in the US meant that even riders who might have appreciated its road comfort and handling simply never encountered it. Meanwhile, the European motorcycle press began focusing on emerging multi-cylinder adventure machines, shifting attention away from big singles like the Pegaso. Although it had pioneered certain design cues, the bike risked being overshadowed by newer concepts parroting its original vision with stronger backing. Context Digest. Reviews from the late 1990s and early 2000s often mentioned the Pegaso 650, alongside mention of its relative affordability compared to multi-cylinder competitors abroad. But affordability often depends on perceived long-term value, and reliability narratives weren't consistent because dealer experiences varied widely across regions. Riders comfortable with self-maintenance found the Rotax engine responsive and easy to work on, though discovering replacement parts outside Europe demanded patience and connections. Reflection bridge. Competition wasn't always about performance, it was about the confidence buyers had in finding help when they needed it. Micro story. The final iterations of the Pegaso 650 adopted styling updates that emphasized a sleeker silhouette and more road-focused ergonomics, signaling a quiet pivot away from rugged aspirations. Some enthusiasts appreciated the changes as modernization, while others saw them as evidence that Aprilia didn't fully believe in committing to an off-road identity. The model's identity drift paralleled a broader shift in consumer tastes, where riders leaned toward higher displacement and advanced electronics, further burying the original concept under market noise. For those who recognized what the Pegaso offered, its uniqueness became a personal badge of distinction. But for many riders, the model blended into obscurity before they even realized it existed. That final arc of adaptation and retreat leads directly into the question of legacy, where the impact of the Pegaso 650 shows up in quieter, more surprising ways beyond its own sales figures. The Aprilia Pegaso 650 may not have dominated sales charts, but its DNA traveled farther than most riders realize, influencing design priorities and attitudes within the adventure segment long after its nameplate faded from showrooms. Microstory. As multi-cylinder adventure bikes gained cultural traction, designers and engineers quietly borrowed concepts introduced by the Pegaso 650, such as upright ergonomics paired with sport touring sensibilities and hybrid styling that balanced rugged cues with European flair. Even if the model couldn't command spotlight attention, it demonstrated that a single-cylinder platform could offer real-world versatility for riders who wanted one machine to handle commuting, light trails, and weekend tours. Owners who kept theirs on the road talked about how the bike surprised them with balanced handling on winding asphalt and dirt connectors, planting seeds of possibility in a category still searching for definition. That influence didn't appear in brochures, but it surfaced in how subsequent adventure models approached weight distribution and rider comfort. Context Digest. As the industry moved toward larger displacements and electronics packages, some manufacturers circled back to the idea of lighter, simpler travel bikes, drawing indirectly from what the Pegaso tried to prove decades earlier. Marketing language shifted to emphasize approachability, everyday usability, and mixed-terrain competence, traits Aprilia had layered into the Pegaso long before those keywords gained traction in North America. Even if few riders traced that lineage directly, the philosophy lived on through design sketches, engineering hires, and component testing that echoed the original mission. Meanwhile, collectors and restorers began tracking down surviving units in Europe and select US markets. Microstory. Enthusiasts who rescue Pegaso. 650s today often speak to the satisfaction of owning a motorcycle that feels like a missing link between early dual sports and contemporary adventure tourers. They customize luggage solutions, refresh suspension, and track down parts through international suppliers or online forums. That dedication reveals a form of grassroots legacy, where appreciation grows quietly rather than through manufacturer-backed celebration. Some owners say the bike generates curiosity at meetups because it's recognizable yet uncommon, prompting questions about how it performed and why it disappeared. Reflection bridge. The model's understated presence allowed it to influence the segment without drawing attention to itself. Microstory. Aprilia itself would eventually channel lessons learned from the Pegaso 650 into later adventure-oriented projects, embracing larger displacement options and modern technology while retaining some of the original bike's visual cues and rider positioning. The knowledge gained about chassis balance, rider ergonomics, and cross-market expectations informed future development paths. While the company's bigger adventure platforms eventually overshadowed the Pegaso name, echoes of the original concept persisted in how Aprilia approached touring and off-pavement potential. Context digest: for American riders examining the motorcycle landscape in retrospect, the Pegaso 650 represents a cautionary tale about timing, support networks, and how novelty alone cannot overcome distribution challenges. Yet it also serves as a reminder that influence doesn't always follow sales numbers. Sometimes it travels through design language, user experience, and the lessons engineers carry forward. That convergence of quiet impact and visible obscurity circles back to the broader meaning of its existence, setting up the final perspective on what its journey reveals about ambition and legacy. The trajectory of the Pegaso 650 doesn't end with discontinued production. It ends with a present-day understanding of its role in shaping expectations, leaving a footprint larger than its sales might suggest, and positioning its story as one worth remembering for what it introduced rather than what it sold. Looking back at the Aprilia Pegaso 650, its story becomes more than a footnote in the evolution of adventure motorcycles. It becomes a case study in how intention, timing, and perception determine whether a machine becomes a legend or a ghost in the archives. The Pegaso 650 entered the scene with genuine ambition, carrying a Rotax single-cylinder engine and a design meant to bridge pavement and gravel without leaning too hard in either direction. It was positioned as practical, stylish, and capable, but it arrived in a market that didn't quite know how to categorize it and didn't have the dealer infrastructure to support it. That mismatch shaped the ownership experience, especially in the United States, where rider confidence is often tied as much to support and parts as performance and style. What makes the Pegaso 650 meaningful today is how many of its core traits resurfaced in later adventure models that finally received the attention and resources it never had. When riders now talk about middleweight dual-purpose motorcycles with upright ergonomics, road comfort, and dirt tolerance, they're describing values the Pegaso baked in before the segment fully matured. It's not that the model was perfect. Fuel range, accessory access, and dealership presence limited its reach, but its concept proved relevant long after production stopped. For US riders, the ownership reality today is part practicality and part passion project. Part sourcing often means connecting with overseas suppliers or aftermarket specialists, and maintenance depends on comfort with hands-on work, or finding independent shops willing to service something outside the mainstream. That reality narrows the audience, but it also gives the Pegaso 650 a cult appeal among those who value distinctiveness over convenience. Market angles explore two truths at once. The bike never earned widespread recognition, but it influenced decision-makers and designers who later refined the idea under better conditions. Its legacy is not in resale value or production numbers. It's in templates reused, features borrowed, and lessons absorbed across brands and borders. That's the quiet power of a machine that seemed to disappear, yet still left fingerprints on the category it tried to define too early. The Aprilia Pegaso 650 reminds us that some motorcycles don't need fame to matter. They just need to show what's possible before anyone else realizes they're watching.